Stealthing is the non-consensual removal of a condom during sex. The non-consensual removal of a condom during sex negates.
Hello. I think you're on mute. I'm not too sure.
Okay, there we go. It's working now.
Madam Speaker, when I tabled the Crimes Stealthing Amendment Bill in April this year, I did so because I know that many people have experienced stealthing, but were unsure or aghast that our laws did not reflect community sentiment that this is a heinous act that is a crime.
And so stealthing is obviously really important. We'll just start with asking you to explain in the most basic way what exactly stealthing is.
Stealthing is the removal or not putting on at all the use of a condom during sexual intercourse, and it's done without actual consent. So it's mostly done in the circumstance where people have consented to having sex, but on the condition that a condom is used, and unbeknownst to one partner, the other person has removed or not used the condom.
Okay, and fitting in with the common definition of rape, how does stealthing kind of position itself there?
So the way that I have drafted my bill says that if there is an intentional misrepresentation about the use of a condom, so either not putting it on, but after having said that you would, it negates consent. And sexual intercourse without consent is sexual assault, and sexual assault is a crime.
The common experience of a victim of stealthing would be similar or the same as, I guess, a common victim of sexual assault or rape. Could you explain a little bit about the common experiences or feelings you've heard of victims of stealthing specifically?
The biggest concern that has been raised with me about stealthing is just the lack of certainty. A lot of the times, because the sexual intercourse itself was consented to, people sort of walk away with a feeling of, what was that? Was that okay? Was it not? And I think that's the biggest concern, because it weighs on your mind and you don't actually know whether you've been the victim of a sexual assault or not. And I've had women who probably around my age now that look back on experiences they had in their 20s or when they were younger and sort of brushed it off and walked away thinking, oh, that was just a bad experience. And now, knowing what they know now, have realized, hold on, that actually was sexual assault. I actually didn't consent. And so it's really important that our laws, accurately as possible if they can, capture the behaviour that society deems is unacceptable.
Yes, okay, and so I guess talking about that social mindset around what is and what isn't rape, could you explain a little bit about what you think around the social mindset that exists for stealthing in particular? I know that there are lots of instances, unfortunately, of people, victims, but also perpetrators or people in power who kind of brush it off as not real rape.
Yeah, and I think that you hit the nail on the head when, some people sort of distinguish between what's real rape and not. And that's why my law has been drafted in a very clear way to say that the removal or the non-use of a condom without consent of that action negates consent itself to the act of sex. And we all know that if you don't have consent for sex, then that is rape, and that needs to be made clearer. Now, I'm not a legal purist. I don't sit here and pretend that if I change the law, then magically this will all be fixed. It's a very complex issue, and we need to make sure that there is education and public awareness around this as well. But with the law, that's an important part of making sure we do that as a society, because our laws are what society deems to be acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. If we make it very clear in our laws that this is unacceptable, then that should send a strong message to would-be perpetrators.
Yes, and speaking about the way stealthing is positioned in the Australian justice system, but broader, why does it seem stealthing has been so off the legal radar in so many places? It seems not many people know the name of stealthing. It's not a real criminal act in any jurisdictions, or many, I should say. So why do you think it has been so off the legal radar for so long?
I think that broadly speaking, sexual assaults and sex-related crimes have always been very complex and tricky, and part of that is because of the long-term stigma that's attached to reporting of these types of horrendous incidents, and that has stopped people from publicly talking about it. And so when you're talking about something that happens in the most intimate of moments, and a lot of the times it happens with somebody that you trust, like implicitly. Most people sort of think rape and they think dark alleyway, some stranger coming up and very violently doing something. And we know that vast majority of sexual assaults do not occur that way. And I think that's one of the reasons why the criminal justice system hasn't been able to deal with it effectively for so long. And that's something that does need to change. It's not easy, because obviously the nature of our criminal law is that it's innocent until proven guilty, and proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and that makes it difficult when you're trying to make sure that people realise consent has to be freely given, and it's got to be an affirmative sort of type of action. So there is a disconnect in that regard, and that's what makes it difficult.
You mentioned the stigma as well that surrounds stealthing, and the necessity of having it grounded as a criminal act of rape in the law, kind of breaking that down. And that leads me on to thinking about the online sex trend of stealthing. If you take away the kind of regular social discourse and you enter the online world, there seems to be memes of people speaking blasé about stealthing, and it kind of being a bit of a trend, a bit of a challenge where mates will jeer each other on. Do you think that contributes to this stigma around discussing stealthing and grey area sexual assault, and the way people view stealthing itself?
I think that, and that's a cultural shift. And, for so long, when behaviour that is clearly unacceptable has sort of been brushed off as, oh, boys will be boys, that type of mentality, and that needs to stop, obviously. And I do think that our society is on the cusp of changing that culture. I just hope that it doesn't take so long that people in your generation miss out on this type of thing, because it is difficult, but I do see it changing. And part of that is obviously the movement that we saw happen earlier this year, that was very, very powerful and went all around the country. And the most stark thing about that movement when it was sparked was it took one very courageous woman to come out and speak about the experience. But the fact that it resonated with so many women, across the country and perhaps around the world, just goes to show the anger, the frustration, and the sheer desperation that many women were feeling and probably hiding because of that stigma, where they don't want to speak up about their own experiences. And that's why it's so important that we do everything we can to reduce that stigma. And also, it's not just for the women to do so, but for the men as well to do that. And don't get into this habit of, oh yeah, well, boys will be boys, or jeering each other on, as you said. That's just, it's long gone. That is long gone. That should not be an acceptable part of our society now.
I was going to mention the fact that there's a lot more open discussion in Australia coming from just one case in Parliament. So thank you for touching on that. But if we kind of look across the water, New Zealand had their first stealthing as rape in court earlier this year. What do you think this signals?
I think that the fact that there was a successful conviction of rape based on stealthing is going to set a good precedent around the world. And it's funny, because when I was drafting this law and working on it, there was some feedback from some circles in the legal fraternity to say, hey, we think that it might be covered already under our laws. We're not 100% sure. But because we had no precedent, the mere fact that there was a question mark, I think, is enough for us to make sure that we make it clear in our laws. And that's what prompted me to actually still go ahead and bring it forward. And the fact that we've seen in New Zealand a conviction without the type of specific law that I'm proposing, I think is a good sign,
I was going to ask about why you think there is a change in attitude towards sexual assault, especially in the way the law treats it.
I think it was a long time coming, and as we know, with most social change, and I don't want to say the word revolution because it sort of has different connotations, but in a way, when we see most social change happen, it's because people start to become more educated and the public awareness goes up, and also the breakdown of stigma that's attached to it, so that the shame that is attached to the feeling of some of those experiences goes away. When people start to realize that they're not on their own, when people start to realize that if they do speak up, they're not the ones who are going to be hung out to dry, but they'll have support behind them, I think it gives them enormous courage. And that's what we're starting to see, and that's an important part. There is no one single aspect that is going to change something miraculously. The law is an important aspect, but so is education, so is the culture, so is the conversations that we have with our peers and with our friends, and just making sure that no one feels alone. I think it's really important. They're all important parts of what we can all do, and everyone can play their part in bringing about positive change in this way.